Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the US Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. Today is Sunday, January 11th, 2026, and we are pleased to offer to you today a conversation with a candidate who may be endorsed by our U.S. Transhumanist Party in very short order. First, I would like to introduce our panel for today. We have our Director of Visual Arts, Art Ramon Garcia, and we have our Director of Community and Citizen Science, who also ran as our 2024 U.S. Vice Presidential candidate, Daniel Tweed. And our special guest today is Hunter Rand. Hunter is running for Sparks, Nevada City Council, Ward 2. And this is a notable campaign for several reasons. First of all, Sparks, Nevada is located in northern Nevada, fairly close to where I reside. It's about a 40 to 45-minute drive away from Carson City, Nevada. And this is an area I'm quite familiar with myself. I visit it several times per month, and you can find out more about Hunter Rand on his website at sparkstogether.com. I think it's a quite memorable name for his campaign, Sparks Together, and I think it emphasizes some priorities that he will explain to us in short order. A major reason why we invited him on is that the US Pirate Party had endorsed him recently in November 2025. And here's a link on the Pirate Party website to its endorsement of Hunter Rand, written by my counterpart, the captain of the US Pirate Party, Jolly Mitch DeVillo, who you might remember was a guest on one of our previous Virtual Enlightenment Salons. And of course, in September of 2025, we entered into a political coalition with the US Pirate Party called All Hands for a Free Future. You can read the announcement of that coalition here. And the major purpose of this coalition is to achieve a process for the cross-endorsement of candidates. So when we have a position, be it for local office or for a state legislature or for governor or even for federal elected office, anything other than President of the United States, the idea is we have a streamlined cross-endorsement process whereby if one party endorses a candidate, the other party should endorse that candidate in short order. So I reached out to Hunter. I actually met with him in person just this Friday. We had a great conversation, about 3 hours, and he told me a great deal about his campaign. So I'm really thrilled to have him on as a guest for our virtual audience so that you could get to know Hunter Rand and his campaign. And I think we have an announcement from Hunter regarding the cross-endorsement, because I did offer the USTP endorsement to him pursuant to this process. But Hunter, welcome. Please tell us more about yourself, your background, why you're running, and how all of this came to be.
My background is kind of all over the place. I always wanted to be in the film industry. And so in high school, I was in the video classes, and then I got a job right out of high school at a marketing office as a cinematographer and editor. Ended up working at the University of Nevada, Reno for 7 years in various capacities, and ended up working for Nevada women's basketball as the director of social media, something I'm incredibly proud of. And from there, I left to go teach video production at Spanish Springs High School in a similar program. I did not attend Spanish Springs High School, but it's a federally funded career and tech uh, career and technical education program. There we go. And trying to say that not all students need to go to college. We can teach them career skills right there in high school. And so that was the kind of program that I was in when I was in high school. And for me to go back and be able to impart my knowledge on, our young filmmakers, our young television producers, and kind of give back to that community in that way. I did that for a few years. I founded my own, or co-founded my own company called Eddie Weston and Company, which is a creative services agency. We're still in business, and I have taken a step back, which I'll get to. But then I also work as a director of marketing at a local estate planning firm, and compliance officer. At the same time, I'm still one night a week directing and producing live sports. So right now, I'm in the middle of a basketball contract. Depending on what games and where they are, it kind of varies on what day of the week it is. I you know, kind of wanted to stay out of politics. As a filmmaker, I'm very much behind the camera, and I like being behind the camera. My wife and I are incredibly private people, and in the words of another elected official that's local here in Sparks, I'm one of the most boring people he's ever met, despite my career. And in July of 2024, I was dragged by a drunk driver. I had been providing medical aid, and he didn't need medical aid. He was just drunk, which we figured out after the fact when the police showed up, and he took me down the road and put me in the hospital, almost killed me. And what happened was people just got out of their cars and started helping. Someone chased him. He would not have been caught if someone didn't put their own life on the line. And he got from, we say, I-80 to La Posada. It's about a 20-25 minute drive on a good day, maybe 15 minutes. He did it in 6 minutes, and someone chased him, and they were able to get him, at the end of that road and arrest him. And we're still going through the process of that prosecution. But what was impressed upon me was the fact that all these people, over 30 people, just stopped what they were doing, stopped their day, got out of their cars. There was a doctor that just happened to be there and got out of her car and stopped bleeding. Um, People someone was wrapping my head because I was thrashing around, and then our fire department showed up, and they're all firefighter paramedics, and they provided a very high level of medical aid that saved my leg, that prevented further damage to my body. And I understand that not all fire departments have that level of medical training, and so I'm very privileged to live in a community where we do have that uh, asset available to our community members. And I spent a lot of time in the hospital and a lot of time, in physical therapy, just thinking. And what I've come to the conclusion is I don't want to be apathetic anymore. There's a lot of things that I don't agree with that have been going on in our community, primarily a lack of representation. We have an elected representative who is technically my neighbor, and I feel like they're not doing a good job representing us. I believe that this is a representative democracy, and that people should always come first. People should always uh, becoming before corporations, before money. And we've had some decisions where we have obviously not been represented, where every single public comment is ignored, which is painful sometimes, seeing how much effort my neighbors, my fellow community members, have put into advocating for issues that are important to them. And so we're running our campaign a little bit differently. And I'm not going to come in with a sharp tongue, not coming in with a lot of money. But my goal is that we can outwork the opposition. And I understand that this is not something I can do alone, and it's not about me. And so that's why my web domain name is sparkstogether.com. It's not Vote for Hunter or Hunter for Ward 2, which someone actually bought all those domain names after I announced I was running. But it is Sparks Together, because I recognize it takes lots of people together working for a common goal to make something happen. I'm not running for the title. I'm not running for the money. I'm running because we lack representation, and we need some change.
Yes, thank you very much, Hunter, for those remarks. And again, please see Hunter's website at sparkstogether.com. I read through it. I think it is extremely well designed and well written. It's clear that Hunter put a lot of thought into the layout of the website as well as how he presents the issues. And this is not common for political candidates, especially at the local level. I have experience running for office in 2018 and 2020 for my local, what is called a general improvement district in Douglas County, Nevada, the Indian Hills General Improvement District. And I was the only candidate with any web presence for both of those years. Now, for some candidates, I could find maybe a LinkedIn profile, but there was very little information publicly available. And I happen to think that those other candidates, at least the ones I knew directly or knew of, were good people. So this is not a criticism of those candidates, but this is a remark that it is incredibly rare for a candidate at a local level for a city council position to have the kind of website that Hunter has. And I think this is really to his credit. Now, Hunter, what would you say are the three main issues in Sparks, Nevada right now that you have focused your campaign on? You gave a really detailed discussion of each of these issues to me, and I think our viewers would benefit from hearing about them.
So I think the most primary issue right now is our fire service. At the end of the day, I think fire services that are effective, that are well funded, are incredibly important, especially when they're usually the first responder for medical calls. We live in one of our district is older. My house was built in 1968. I have cloth Romex in the walls. It is not affordable for me to take that out of the walls. And I know all of my neighbors have cloth Romex in their walls. And with that said, we have one of the highest rates of house fires in our neighborhood. And those house fires, to control them, they happen fast. It takes a lot of resources. We had a fire recently in our neighborhood, in our ward. I actually went to go visit those houses because I wanted to talk to their residents, not realizing that the houses had burned down, and saw the damage that had happened in 3 minutes. And so we have the highest rate of house fires in our city is in our neighborhood. On the other side of that, we also have some of the highest rate of medical calls in our neighborhood, because a lot of these homes have older folks. Some of them are the original owners. I know my neighbor on one side of me is the original owner, her and her husband. Her husband has since passed. And then on the other side of me, one of the two people that lives there is also the original owner. And then the other person in our cul-de-sac is an original owner. And then if we skip a house, we have another original owner. And all these people are over 60. You know, that's what our fire department is responding to. And our community has developed a dependence on that. We have a professional ambulance company called REMSA Health. And, they I can't complain. They've come to my aid as well, and they're just sometimes not the first people there. So the biggest issue that we're having is we have a shortage of firefighters. We haven't recovered positions from the 2008 layoffs, and so since 2008, all the other fire departments in northern Nevada and southern Nevada are running 4 men on a truck. Uh, we run three. We've run three since 2008, and there's some issues with that. There's some issues with mandatory overtime because someone calls in sick. When you have 4 men on a crew and someone calls in sick, they're still allowed to run that truck with 3 men. When you have 3 men on a crew and that's a schedule and someone calls in sick, that means someone from a previous shift is staying for 2 more days, 48 more hours. We do 48 hours on and then 4 days off. And so we're asking some of these firefighters to work 4 days in a row. And some of our fire stations, I did a ride along at Station 1, which is one of the busier stations. Every 20 minutes there was a call. I did not finish my lunch. And these guys are not getting a good night's sleep, because they're out there serving our community. Further, we are opening a new fire station. It's been in the works for like 15 years, and it's in an area called Kylie Ranch. So it's just north of our district. And they're closing a fire station in Wingfield Springs, which was our northernmost fire station. So in Wingfield Springs, their response times are going from 2 minutes to 6.5 minutes. So we're not talking about doubling response times. We're talking about more than tripling response times. And that's another community where we have a lot of older folks. They have a decently high rate of medical calls compared to fire calls. And so there might be some things that we can do to still serve those medical calls, but they want to close that fire station, move those firefighters to the new station, Station 6, and I see a domino effect happening where all these fire stations that are further south are going to be covering areas further north, and it's going to take them longer to get to places. And when you look at a house fire, so the house fire that was in our neighborhood, we had 7 engines on the scene, which is all of our fire stations, and then one from a neighboring district. And what happens if there's another house fire or a medical call? We're kind of already at our limit. So to keep our station open at our current staffing levels, we're short 9 firefighters. But in my opinion, we're short a lot more than 9 firefighters. I think we should have 4-man crews. I think that's the first thing we should do to take care of our firefighters and make them a more effective force. Allow them to be able to call in sick without forcing someone to do mandatory overtime. And so to get back to that, I think it's closer to 20 or 30 firefighters that we're short. So that's the number one issue that I see us having right now that's affecting us directly. I mean, that isn't like something 20 years down the road. That's something that's happening right now, and it's terrifying. If I call 911, is someone going to show up? And we have a mutual aid with the city of Reno and Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District, and those departments are great, but they're not in our neighborhood, so they might show up eventually, but it's going to take them some time, and that's scary. What if I'm having a heart attack? What if I am bleeding out? Uh, and what I can say is if we're having a house fire that we're fighting, we don't have the surge capacity, so we're automatically you know, asking for help from a neighboring jurisdiction. Uh, what is scary to me as well with that lack of surge capacity, I'm looking at the UPS MD-11 crash at UPS Worldport. And from the end of the runway, it's 3 miles of destruction. And it isn't me being paranoid. That has happened in our community. Our airport is right in the middle of the city, and the takeoff and landing path is right through Ward 2 if you leave the airport going north. And if you draw a line that's 3 miles, it goes all the way to the top of Ward 2. And if something like that were to happen in our community, it would be devastating. I think I look at the deaths at UPS Worldport. I think only 15 people died, and that is it's tragic. It's a lot less than it could have been, and that's a success in zoning. Zoning low employee density businesses in that area, a lot of storage places, a lot of warehouses. We don't have that. We have neighborhoods, we have houses, we have a high school, we have elementary schools in that path, and we've had plane crashes like that before. We had in the 70s, Galaxy Airlines took off southbound, crashed in a field, and 71 deaths, I believe, and one survivor. And where that plane crashed, there's a target now. Like, we're lucky that there was nothing there when that plane crashed. More recently, we had the Galloping Ghost incident. We used to have the Reno air races here, and the Galloping Ghost hit the grandstand. I want to say there were 70 injuries, 30 amputations, and 12 deaths. And that was another event that tested our surge capacity. And in my opinion, as well as we handled it, we did not handle it that well. And that's not a critique of our first responders. That's not a critique of our government. We're a small community, and the fact of the matter is sometimes there's incidents that exceed our surge capacity, and right now we don't have a surge capacity. So I don't know if we want to stop for questions or if you want me to move on to the next two things.
Yes, I think this is a good opportunity to stop for questions because your remarks on the shortage of firefighters, the quality of fire services in Sparks did spark a lot of questions. First of all, though, some compliments from our viewers. Mike Lazine wrote, he is loving Hunter's selfless doctrine and philosophy. Luis Arroyo congratulates you for the effort on your website. And Daniel Tweet remarks, public safety, for instance, with regard to fire and crime, is generally the top concern of most city residents. And he also notes he thinks about 80% of structure fires are electrical in origin. Mike Lazine writes that makes sense, especially when fires start in a structure's walls due to faulty wiring. And probably the second highest frequency of fires would be chemical related, for instance, related to propane or grease. And it's interesting that Sparks housing is generally of older stock, so it would be more likely to have faulty wiring and issues with other systems, maybe issues with gas pipelines as well. So some questions from Daniel. Does Sparks have a CERT, Community Emergency Response Team training opportunity?
So yes and no. We have CERT through the Washington County Sheriff's Office, so our county, and I think they're excellent. I think the first time I've ever actually seen them really deployed personally was during the pandemic and COVID, and they did a freaking awesome job. Those people are selfless. In addition to that, we do have a hasty team, so a rescue team. I have a friend that used to serve on that team as a diver. And they do everything from evidence recovery in bodies of water to, if you decide to go hiking and there's a snowstorm on Mount Rose, they'll come and get you and, make fun of you on the way down. They're very skilled. I've gotten to work with them, as I've interacted with the community, participated in events. I've seen them in action. I have also been a few, maybe about 10 or 11 years ago, I was really into trail running, and I went off the trail and ended up in a cactus, and someone came and got me. So they're a great resource, and none of that is paid. So we do have CERT, but it's not through the city.
Yes, thank you for that answer. And I engage in trail running myself, so I understand sometimes one can get into some challenging situations there on the trail if one is several miles away from civilization. It's great to have some confidence that there will be people coming to the rescue. Another question from Daniel, is there a volunteer fire service portal in Sparks? Because you mentioned a shortage of professional firefighters. Are there any opportunities for volunteer firefighters to be trained or brought in to help?
There are not right now. I don't know if that's something that the fire departments would want to look at. And first off, I want to say, I believe in listening to our fire professionals. If our fire professionals say that that's what they want, then that's what we need to do. If they say that there's not room for that, it would be too complicated to integrate that, then I'm going to listen to the professionals that have been doing this for 30 years, especially because they've worked in communities with volunteer fire departments. I know that other people have been mentioning that, and I don't know what the future of that would look like. There's going to be an empty firehouse up there with a fire engine in it. At the same time, is that an anti-labor position to say we're not going to hire these firefighters. We're going to have a volunteer firefighter force up there. At the same time, is that what's putting people first? I think there might be a middle ground there, but I would have to, next time I see the fire chief, I'll have to ask him what his thoughts on that. We do have some volunteer fire departments in northern Nevada to fill in some gaps in the Washoe Valley, up on Mount Rose, where fire departments are far and few between. I don't think Sparks has had a volunteer fire department since the early 1900s. So we've been really blessed. This fire service has been professional fire service for over 100 years, and because of that, they have a great history, a lot of knowledge. Some of that knowledge is written in blood, but they've learned from those lessons. They take that forward, and that's why I think we have one of the best fire departments in the whole country right here in Sparks, Nevada.
Yes, thank you very much. And in terms of my experience, the quality of fire protection in northern Nevada has generally been excellent. And this is one of the attributes that distinguishes us and the fire risk that we face from that in California. Because in California, we see stories every year of devastating wildfires that destroy hundreds, thousands, sometimes over 10,000 homes. And this has never happened in Nevada. And there are some differences, of course, in terms of the terrain, the vegetation, the population density. But if we had, let's say, a California level of fire response in many cases, we might have a tragedy where hundreds of homes are destroyed by a fire. And the reason, in my view, why that hasn't happened up until that time, and why I hope it will never happen, is because our firefighters are on those fires essentially right when they start. And it does trouble me when an area reduces the fire protection available, especially since firefighters from a particular area can get called to assist on other fires, especially during wildfire season. Sometimes they may go to a different state. And then if there are not enough firefighters in a local community and a fire arises there, that could be quite problematic. Now, we have some statistics about Sparks, Nevada that Daniel provided. Sparks has a growing population, estimated around 111,520 in 2025, up from about 108,886 in the 2020 census, with continued growth projected, making it a significant part of the larger Reno-Sparks metro area. It's known as a family-friendly city with a diverse community and strong job growth in northern Nevada. Daniel also remarks this is about the same population as Thousand Oaks, California, where he has stood for 4 city council elections. And Mike Lazine writes where he lives in Menifee, California, their population is about the same as in Sparks. It's about 115,000 plus. So we have viewers who have experience living in that kind of community. And for those viewers, I would suggest when you hear Hunter's remarks, think about how similar or how different the situations are in your own communities with regard to fire protection and with regard to the other issues that we will be discussing, because I think there are insights here that are generalizable as well. Now, we have an interesting question from Mike Lazine. Would you be for leading futuristic firefighting approaches, including starting where you are at in Sparks, Nevada? For instance, Mike uses examples of remote controlled robots used to combat fires, and that could also reduce the loss of life on the part of residents, of course, but firefighters as well.
So absolutely. I want to tell you what the city's already doing. So we have drone as a first responder, and I'll get into some of the issues with that later with my third item. But one of the things about drone as a first responder that's super cool is what the fire chief told me about is if someone's calling 911 and saying that there's a fire, they can dispatch that drone and a fire truck. The fire truck or fire engine is going to take a few minutes to get there. The drone will probably beat it. And now we can know if we need to dispatch more assets before the first engine gets there, which means your total fire response is going to be quicker, is going to be more effective, more informed. People are not arriving to something that they don't know how bad it is, versus the traditional fire responses. Maybe they're dispatching one or two fire engines or trucks, um, but they're not necessarily asking for more assets until someone is there and someone has their eyes on the fire. The same could be said for medical responses and things like that. But I also do know that they are looking at implementing AEDs delivered by drones. Which is great. The problem with that is we need more training opportunities for those AEDs. I am trained on those, but I don't think any of my neighbors are. But it's still cool that we're going to be able to have, I believe, every police car. I might be mistaken. Every police car has an AED. Every fire truck, fire engine has an AED. But for me to say, call 911 and I'm in my cul-de-sac and um, say, hey, send me an AED. I'm trained on it, and that's what I think I need. And for that to arrive, I think that's the coolest thing we have. I do know that Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District, which helps Sparks a lot, we employ the use of bulldozers with that fire department, which is, in my opinion, is a little bit of an interesting firefighting technique. And we've had some incidents in the past few years where that fire did almost jump to the neighborhoods. I want to say it was 3 years ago, just before the LA fires. Just north of Ward 2, we have a big open patch of desert, and we had a wildfire, and it came within a half mile of my house. I live in the middle of a dense neighborhood. It came within a few feet of some other people's houses. And I think our benefit is faster air response, bulldozers, and a very experienced wild firefighting uh, fire department. In LA, our Sparks Fire Department, Reno, Truckee Meadows aided. We aid on a lot of wildfires, and we have a lot of wild firefighting resources. So I think, yeah, more robots.
Yes, more robots. And your comments also speak to the quality of the firefighting response in northern Nevada. We had some viewers like Mike Lazine remark with regard to the Los Angeles wildfires, so many things went wrong with those fires. He thought they could have been avoided, but ultimately, where California failed in protecting its residents from those fires, Nevada firefighters ultimately stepped into that void. So that is remarkable in and of itself. Now, in regard to automated external defibrillator units, or AEDs, Daniel points out emergency responding drones can be used to rapidly dispatch them. And he also writes that he believes to prevent citywide firestorms, homes should employ on-site firefighting water rooftop sprinklers, which do exist in various homes, and the ability to make clouds of high-pressure fog. I'm wondering, in regard to those kinds of enhancements, perhaps the issue in Sparks is that the housing stock is so much older, so homes, when they were built back then, of course, did not have rooftop sprinklers or anything similar. Do you think there's a possibility eventually for various homes to get retrofitted with that technology?
I do know that a lot of the newer homes that are built on the edge of our community, they're starting to incorporate sprinkler systems, and they're being built to just be not flammable. I know we were the last jurisdiction to adopt the wildfire interfacing code. It costs a couple $1,000s more per house, which is, in my opinion, not a lot, but it's kind of saying, like, we're going to use stucco and we're going to use ceramic roof tiles and things that are just not flammable. We're going to have sprinkler systems. With the older houses, the problem with retrofitting is where do the funds come from? And the hardest thing is asking people to retrofit their homes is hard. I don't know how much a system like that would cost, probably a few $1,000s. I don't think it would be as much as, rewiring every home. I've personally gotten a quote for that, and it was $30,000 about 5 years ago. I imagine it's a lot more now. And that's labor, that's copper, and things like that. I know to add a traditional sprinkler system to my home, it would be just a couple $1,000s. So to add an outdoor sprinkler system would be a couple $1,000s. So it's more doable than rewiring a home. The problem with that is if every house has a sprinkler system like that, we could see the possibility of a decrease in water pressure, which the firefighters need. And that's something that happened in LA for a number of reasons. I think they had some infrastructure failures. I do know that there were an area where the road collapsed on the water main, and it cut a whole neighborhood off from the water, cut those fire hydrants off. And so that's something where we would want to loop in our water authority, loop in the fire professionals, and see maybe there's a strategic way about this. That is not something I've personally explored, but that is absolutely an option. As far as like the temporary systems, then we have to ask the questions: what about people that are older or disabled? How are they going to deploy those? And maybe that's where CERT comes in. Our community emergency response teams. That's where volunteers can come in. I think LA has changed how we look at wildfires coming into urban areas, and I think people are still kind of writing the book on that.
Yes, thank you for those responses. Daniel writes there are do-it-yourself temporary sprinklers that residents can deploy to connect to a hose and straddle the peak of the roof. And Mike Lazine mentions fireproofing older homes could be a business that someone can start, and that person would have a booming business in his view, especially if residents are concerned about the fire risk. And I know, at least in terms of the level of concern in Nevada, that has been rising, not necessarily the frequency or severity of fires, because I have studied the statistics for the past 32 years, and the fires themselves have not become more destructive, but I attribute that to the quality of the response. And this is where the focus on the quality and availability of the response needs to be maintained. Daniel also writes drafting water from pools is an option as well. Now, our member Jennifer Hughes, who ran for mayor in Camden, New Jersey in 2021, wonders, is there any kind of funding, I think is the term she means to use, that could be applied for to replace that of the city? Like if a fire department is reducing staff or a firehouse is being closed, are there possibilities to substitute some other funding source for funding from the city?
So horrible thing I was hoping to avoid, but that's okay. We have a $20 million budget deficit right now in the city of Sparks, and we're coming off of that. I believe there were 11 layoffs. 8 of those layoffs were fire support staff, I believe, and firefighters. And it's hard for me to understand. I have watched the 4-hour budget meeting. I went to the public comments. I went to those firefighter graduation where they all got laid off immediately afterwards. I don't understand why other areas weren't targeted, as awful as that sounds, right? If we're going to lay people off, why did we look at the fire department when we don't have a bloated fire department, in my opinion? The amount, I want to say last year, or 2 years ago, 2024, sorry, I forget that it's 2026. I think 2024, there was $3 million paid in firefighter overtime. Now, $1.5 million, I believe, is reimbursed by the federal government because that is wildfire fighting overtime. So that doesn't really count. So we're still looking at $1.5 million in overtime paid to Sparks firefighters. And it's mandatory overtime. You know, they, in their labor agreement, they don't get a choice to not work that. Like, they're not volunteering for this. They're being told, you're working an additional shift because someone is called in or someone's unavailable, or a whole crew is in another community because they need wildfire or they have a wildfire. And so for us to cut that workforce further doesn't make sense to me. You know, I think it's unpopular to acknowledge, like, maybe we could cut the parks. Maybe we could cut um, other programs, after school, something. The fact that they went to firefighters, and I hate to say it, it's a big line item. It's super easy. And I think what we have is we have elected officials and they're saying we're making hard decisions. No, you're making the easiest, the literal easiest decision. It's a big line item, and then you're calling it a hard decision because it's unpopular. You know, it isn't, we don't have a bloated fire department. If we had 6-man fire crews, if we had, people making $1 million a year in overtime, maybe we could talk about laying off firefighters, but we have the opposite problem. We have, on my ride along, I asked one of the firefighters while he was driving a fire truck how long he had been awake. He said 100 hours because he did 5 days on a wildfire and he was into his second day on shift. And I asked him how he was staying awake, and he said, a whole lot of caffeine. And then he told me that he's probably going to die when he's 50. And that's what the statistics say. And that's tragic. We don't have enough firefighters. And so we need to get creative with funding. We need to get creative with revenue. And some of that has to happen at the state level, right? We're kind of, one of the biggest issues we have is everyone looks at a 25-year plan, and we need to start looking at 75 or 100 years, regardless of whether we're here or not. I know Kennedy said that he hopes I would be here in 75 years. But at the end of the day, for me, it doesn't matter if I'm here or not. We need to still make a good decision for our future Sparks residents, for our children's children and their children, because right now we're having some revenue problems because of our property taxes. They're the lowest in the country, they're capped. And when you actually start researching the problem of property taxes, you start going back to the 1960s, where the state started the first of 5 laws to cap property taxes and lower them. And they were just thinking about themselves. So those are the people that I would curse at. And the problem is the last person that voted for that died in the 1990s, right? They don't care about us because they're not going to be here. And I think that's a, a suicidal mindset. Um, yeah. So sorry about I mean, it's a big issue.
Yes, the short-termism of certain politicians, and I would say the short-termism that's prevalent in the broader society is, of course, concerning, and it's at the root of many issues. So the conversation you and I had, Hunter, related to short lifespans driving the short-termism because a lot of people feel like their time horizons shouldn't extend much beyond the time that they expect to be alive. Now, speaking of that, firefighters dying in their 50s is a tragedy. Daniel writes his uncle Lou was a Portland, Oregon firefighter who died in his early 50s. And it is troubling to me whenever professionals tasked with saving lives, especially, are overworked to that extent where they have to resort to measures that damage their health in order to keep up with the workload, because that damages the quality of the response as well. Even if they're trying their best, if you've been awake for 100 hours, there's no way you would be as competent as if you had a good night's sleep. But also, these people, of course, are putting so much on the line. They are investing their entire lives into helping people. And for a 50-year lifespan to be their consequence, it's not a reward, it's a punishment. I really question that system. I question a system that has such low staffing that you don't have situations where a firefighter can just have an 8-hour shift and go home at the end of that shift, and somebody else, somebody fresh, will come in for the next 8-hour shift. Mike Lazine writes, there are just certain things you should not cut funding for, and that includes anything that is first responder related. That is insane. And he also notes so many disastrous things happened during the Los Angeles fires. And one of the reasons why the fires became so bad, in my view, was the city of Los Angeles had cut staff. It had cut funding for fire engines. A lot of fire engines were just sitting there, essentially in storage, but they weren't authorized to deploy them. They weren't ready to be deployed. And that really hampered the speed of the response. So we do have a question here from Daniel. He thinks the 5 city council members in Thousand Oaks get a salary of around $1,500 a month. What is the compensation in Sparks? How many council members are there? Are they at large or district? So this is just general information for our viewers.
Can you leave that up so I can address each? That's a multi-part question.
Sure.
And I want to be accurate with it. First off, I want to qualify that I do believe in compensation for elected officials, because if you don't compensate elected officials, then only wealthy people can do it. And I don't agree with that. I also don't agree with overcompensating elected officials. So we have 5 city council members and then a mayor. And the salaries are pegged to a percentage of our county commissioner salaries. So when I announced on June 2nd of last year, the salaries were about $50,000 a year, give or take. The next month in July, they were raised. So our city council members are making close to $90,000 to $110,000 a year. The mayor makes more, and that doesn't include the benefits, healthcare, retirement, things like that. If our elected officials made it their full-time job, I'm more comfortable with those numbers. As it stands, there's maybe 1 or 2 that are making it their full-time jobs where I see them out in the community, and that's actually how I met a councilman, Donald Abbott. I had a dispute with our trash company, Waste Management, and I reached out to my council person, who I'm now running against, and she did not reply to my emails. So then I went on to Twitter and complained about it, and Donald Abbott showed up at my front door on a bike and invited me to get in my car and drive with him to Waste Management. He rides his bike at 2 a.m. to see the streetlights that are out. He makes it his full-time job. And if there was an example of an elected official that I would hope to be half of, it's him. And I don't agree with everything he says, but I know that he is thinking about the people. When they were voting on laying off firefighters and raising franchise fees for Waste Management, because that's kind of where they were getting the money from to not lay off as many firefighters, he was the only person that had a statement about him talking to his neighbors and community members about what this would mean, and no one else had obviously talked to it. And that's not to say that they didn't, but I think every elected official could do a little bit better getting out in the community. So we are in districts. So my district, if you go to sparkstogether.com, there's on the front page, I think there's a link that says, what is Ward 2? And it's about 3 miles wide and a mile tall. And we've got about 22,000 people that live here, 12,000 registered voters, and about 5,000 to 6,000 of them will probably turn out to vote in this next election.
Yes, thank you very much for that answer. I think that was quite a thorough response. I will also say I've heard good things about Donald Abbott, who sits on the Sparks City Council, a very dedicated and very approachable city council member from everything that I'm aware of about
And
him.
I want to qualify, he has not endorsed me. I have not asked him to endorse me. He is a personal friend who I've gotten to know because of his activities as a councilman.
Understood. Now, Art Ramon has a question. I think we can answer that in fairly short order. What about state lottery funds? Well, the Nevada Constitution prohibits the state from having a lottery, and that's kind of odd because Nevada, of course, has a reputation for facilitating legalized gambling, but the state is not able to benefit from that. Do you have any insights as to why that is? It seemed to be a contradiction in my view, given Nevada's reputation as a gambling destination.
Probably to protect gaming. It's another law that was probably written by people who are dead, and I don't know. I don't know if that's something that I want. It's. I don't gamble. Um, I've gambled 3 times in my life, and each time was for the novelty of it. When you turn 21 and you're at a casino, and it's not something that appeals to me. That said, I know gaming does play a huge part in our state and funding education, and that's we don't have income tax in our state. Um, my take-home pay is very close to my salary outside of federal, but we have no income tax in the state. So it's sales tax, gaming revenue, the very low property taxes, and so I don't know about state lottery funds, but I know if I want to buy a lottery ticket, I got to drive to California.
Yes. And I would imagine if the Nevada Constitution were amended, this would be an extensive process. It is a difficult process. But a state lottery, if it were implemented, could raise a lot of funds. Now, I am not a gambler myself. I just see negative expected value of the games, which means they're not in my best interest to play. So I have resided in Nevada for really almost 17 years, not quite, but it'll be 17 years in May. I have never gambled. So I am not tempted by this, but if people do come in from out of state to gamble and they support the economy of Nevada in that way, I think having something like a state lottery could be a productive way of harnessing that for the benefit of local communities or for the benefit of the state budget. But again, this would be an uphill battle to implement something like that. Now, Daniel writes, it is a full-time job to be on a city council, so he is glad that the city council members are appropriately compensated. But of course,
So it is not. It doesn't have. It's whatever you make. There's no requirements to do anything. That's the problem. So Donald Abbott makes it his full-time job, and we have other council members that don't, and they have other jobs, and they're not putting 40 hours a week into being a representative. And so that's kind of my issue is there are people that are absolutely working hard and earning that salary, and there are people that are not.
yes. So I do think with a salary in the range you described, people should be expected to spend, say, 8 hours a day, reasonable time for a full-time job devoted to addressing the concerns of the residents and the issues that they themselves care about. Daniel writes, gambling is a tax on people who are bad at math. Yes, I agree. So now let's hear if there are any more questions from Art Ramon or Daniel on the fire response aspect before we allow Hunter to proceed with the other two main issues that he wants to discuss. Let's see, I'm not hearing anything. So Hunter, please go ahead with an overview of the second principal issue in Sparks.
Well, I'm going to skip over the traffic one, and if we have time, maybe we can come back to it. It's such a hyper local issue. I think the thing that people are really interested in right now is AI in law enforcement. And I will say this. Our Sparks Police Department is one of the most professional police departments I've ever had to work with, encountered. And I think that comes from a history of leadership and people in leadership positions working hard to develop that culture. I have had some not good interactions with law enforcement in other communities, in other states. I have been in situations where I am, fearing for my life, and I don't have a criminal record, and I pass as white, and so for me to even say that tells you how bad it is, and I can't imagine how people of color, people that are in minorities would feel. So our police department here in Sparks is one of the best. Um, there's uh, I'd say there's a police officer that I feel represents me. That said, something that has been happening is implementing artificial intelligence in concerning ways. The primarily flock safety. I'm sure lots of people have heard about flock safety. If you haven't, we have license plate reader cameras by a company called Flock Safety all around our community. We have 45 of them right now. A lot of them are grant funded, and because there's so many of them and because there's an AI backend, what it does is it doesn't just say whether or not you passed it. They have the ability to build detailed travel records. And now they have a partner with Ring cameras, which I believe is Amazon, and they do have facial recognition. And so now not only do they have your travel records, they have a list of known associates, what houses you've been to, and does the cost of privacy, giving up that privacy, outweigh the benefits? And the problem is we don't know because we couldn't have that discussion because a lot of this has happened using the consent agenda. Everything is under $100,000. And so it gets slid in on the consent agenda. Additionally, we have our non-emergency dispatch number is now an AI service that doesn't necessarily disclose that it's an AI chatbot when you call the non-emergency dispatch number. And we didn't get a chance to have a discussion on that because that was also passed on the consent agenda, and it was passed during a very controversial meeting. So no one paid attention to it. And on Monday, tomorrow, they are also on the consent agenda is another piece of software called Force Metrics, and it uses AI and it links social media, criminal records, flock safety, these ring cameras that Flock Safety has access to, everything, the drone, shot spotter, which are microphones throughout our community. It links it all together and encourages precision policing. That's what they say it does. And so the issue with that, number one, is we're not even able to have a discussion on that because it's on the consent agenda. And my request is that it's pulled. Maybe this is the best thing ever for law enforcement. Maybe it's not. I don't know. Maybe our AI system that's answering our non-emergency dispatch calls is really good, and that might be saving a lot of money. I know it was cheaper to implement that than hire an additional dispatcher. I don't know because there's no transparency with this. That said, every public records request I've done to the Sparks Police Department, they've been very transparent. I've sat down with the police chief and discussed other things, and I'm sure they're open to sit down with me and discuss this. But the problem is, so far, we have a really bad record with AI in Northern Nevada. Right now, the city of Reno is getting sued by a trucker for violating his Fourth Amendment rights and some other constitutional rights. He went to a casino in town, and their AI said that absolutely this is 100% match for someone that we have trespassed. And then Reno police comes out and they arrest him or they detain him. And despite having a real ID driver's license, pay stubs, everything else in his own name, this police officer essentially said, well, AI says that that's not true. And so they arrest him. They held him for 11 hours, and it was his fingerprints that freed him. I think that we are in the right flyer stage of artificial intelligence. And it's scary to me that we're implementing it in mission critical positions where we still aren't fully sure what it's capable of, and we're still learning what some of the issues are. We look at the Boeing 737 crashes, and I had someone tell me, well, that's just fear mongering. No, it was literally software telling a pilot something that was not true, and the pilot overcorrected, and in two cases, and 400 people are dead. What? Let's say we have a law enforcement officer and they're told to treat someone as a violent felon and it's just a soccer mom. How is that person going to feel? You know, if they have a gun out, is that going to increase the likelihood of even an accident? Or on the other side of it, our police officers become reliant on the system, and it tells them that this person is totally fine and has no criminal record, and it turns out they are a violent felon. You know, and we've had that happen before, where you know, we had a hostage situation a couple years ago. Um, in our neighborhood. It lasted 8 hours, and I watched the body cam footage of the Sparks police officer walking up to the car when it started. He pulled him over for a taillight violation. He was going to give him a warning, and he walks up, and his hand is not on his gun. He was listening to Katy Perry. He was literally just going to tell this guy that his taillight was out, and he gets shot in the neck through the window, and he survived. But you know, if we have an AI system that's telling them to trust this, you know, are we going to see more of that? So that's my concern.
Yes, and indeed, the US Transhumanist Party platform places an extremely high value on individual privacy. Section 1 of our platform advocates for the protection of individual privacy in opposition to systems of technological surveillance. And the concern about some of these systems that you described, for example, force metrics, is that there could be an aggregation of information by a private vendor based on information gathered by other private vendors that could ultimately become as comprehensive as any surveillance system developed by a central government. So the American surveillance system could be emergent in this way, but it could become equivalent in practice to the top-down surveillance system in China. And that is, of course, quite troubling. Now, another aspect is, of course, the false positives. And Daniel writes, people are way too trusting of AI. Right now, AI
Yeah.
systems can hallucinate, and they can be used as aids, but they should never be used to make the decisions, and humans should never essentially just delegate their decision-making power in matters where harm could come to someone else, where it's a life or death kind of issue, or an issue of imposing any sort of penalty on somebody else. Because as you pointed out, if there's a false positive, it gets acted on, somebody could experience grievous harm, and there's a liability exposure too to the jurisdiction that engages in that. So Daniel wonders, if you know this, how big is the lawsuit from that Reno trucker who got misidentified?
So the casino settled, and it is a private settlement, so we'll never know how big that is. The city of Reno has doubled down, and they are defending it. And I don't know how big it is off the top of my head, but I imagine enough that it's uncomfortable to think about the tax dollars going to a settlement. And even if they were to win, even if the city of Reno prevails, that type of defense is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It is a very expensive defense to defend. I mean, any lawsuit is expensive, but that kind of lawsuit is very expensive.
Yes. And of course, given the Sparks budget shortfall exposing the city to that liability potential, I would venture to say is irresponsible. Now, Daniel does write, no wonder Sparks has a $20 million shortfall. Are you aware of the cost of these systems like flock safety, force metrics? Would they contribute significantly to that shortfall? And could you make a case that not implementing them could lead to budgetary savings? He also wonders, how big is the annual budget for Sparks in total?
So our annual budget, when we started the year, was, or that they approved for this year, was supposed to be $120 million, and then they're predicting that there's going to be $100 million in revenue. So that's where the $20 million budget shortfall comes from. There, there was another question. Sorry that it went off of the
Yeah.
screen. I feel like that was a
So
multi-part.
it's in regard to the
Ah,
shortfall and whether these predictive policing kinds of approaches may be contributing to it, because these systems cost money.
So it's tricky. So first off, I'll start by saying that Sparks Police has a staffing shortage also, just like our fire department. It works a little bit differently. So they are supposed to work 8 or 10 hour or 12-hour shifts, and sometimes they're working 24-hour shifts, and they're driving their patrol cars constantly around our communities. At least the firefighters every 20 minutes get to maybe relax for a moment. They're not driving the fire trucks for that whole time. But the police officers are driving their police cars for 20 hours at a time. We have nights where there's only one or two police officers covering our whole city, and just hoping that nothing happens. And on top of that, other law enforcement agencies, Nevada State Police, are also understaffed. They're at half staffing, I believe. The last time I talked to one of the members of their leadership team. So when we look at the cost of these technologies, I think some of them can absolutely assist our police. So the drone is a first responder. The Nevada revised statutes have a lot of guardrails for police use of drones. And so I'm very comfortable with a drone in the air that's being autonomously dispatched in some cases, or dispatched by a person, but autonomously getting to a location, because that can uh, save officer time, officer duty, especially with a system like ShotSpotter. There's a gunshot at a certain place, or it thinks there's a gunshot at a certain place, and they could just send the drone before the police officer gets there. And if the drone determines it was a car backfiring, or something that they shouldn't be concerned about, they can reroute that officer before they get there and hopefully save them some time. Um, or the police officer will just have more information when they get there. I know our shot spotter system, I want to say it's $600,000 a year. In my opinion, it's proven itself. I've seen video of them rolling up on murder scenes, and someone has a gun in their hand still, and they've responded to murders that weren't called in, and were never going to be called in. And so that technology, I've been a huge critic of it. I'm still a critic of it, because we have 2,500 microphones in our city that are listening to everything, and regardless of shot spotters' assurances, Flock Safety has a similar product, and they're currently training it to also listen for voices in distress. I'm being really sarcastic right now. Is this a voice in distress? Right? What is AI going to say? What are the people training it going to say? What is it going to actually be listening for? And so there's not a lot of excuse me, data on that. ShotSpotter, $600,000 a year. Force Metrics is $66,000 for the first year here, I believe. And then the flock safety cameras are about $300,000 a year. My qualification here is a lot of this is grant funded, but my fear with some of these products are like the flock safety cameras, they're leasing that equipment and subscribing to the service. Force Metrics, they're paying for an annual software subscription. ShotSpotter, I'm not sure how their equipment goes, but I do know there's an annual fee for that. What happens is we build dependence on these systems, and the grant funding runs out. Is that's kind of the biggest problem with that, and I look at that in my personal life with Adobe. I look at that in my personal life with Adobe. Adobe funded these CTE programs along with the federal government to the point that they got legislated into the educational curriculum. And so the whole entire film industry becomes dependent on Adobe. And then Adobe switches their model to a software subscription model, which, I'm making money. I can afford $300 a year. Well, then it's $350 a year, and then it's $450 a year. My renewal this year was supposed to be $800. And I will say that I've switched to DaVinci Resolve. I've switched to other products that are a one-time purchase. But separate from that, like, the city's almost getting trapped into that. What happens when these federal funds run out and our officers are dependent on this equipment? Let's ignore the fact that they might be very effective, they might not be effective. Let's pretend that they're very effective. And who are we going to lay off to cover the $66,000 software subscription for Force Metrics? Who are we going to lay off to cover the $300,000 flock safety cameras? And that's kind of the issue I see with that. Would that, and does that mean that we're not going to be able to hire an officer in the future? And what it comes down to is I think we need more money for police as well.
Yes, and I agree with you. Subscription-based product models are of concern. I don't have an Adobe subscription, but it is for that reason that I did not purchase their products. I was concerned about the subscription approach being a drain, whether or not I use the product, whereas a one-time purchase at least means you are aware of where your expenditure ends. And it seems, based on your comments, that the greater risk from these kinds of programs would be the longer term budgetary drain if the grant funding runs out or if the cost increases over time. Again, more of a long-term orientation.
I also believe that some of these systems are unconstitutional. I don't think there's been a lawsuit yet. Um, and I think that's because flock safety is not as effective as they say. I actually posted this morning, I believe it's up on my website, a whole write-up on this force metrics and flock safety problem. And one of my points is sometimes they have these wild claims. They claim that they've helped solve 10% of all crime in the United States. Elsewhere on their website, they used to claim that they had 100% homicide clearance rate in Oklahoma. I think it was Oklahoma City, for Oklahoma City PD. And if you know anything about homicide clearance rates, you get an award at 50%, right? I think there are some cities where it's 20%, and that's a great number to be at. Unfortunately, as dark as that sounds, like 50% is a great homicide clearance rate. And so for them to say that this technology has 100% homicide clearance rate, like it's helped them solve that many homicides, I don't think it's true. You can look up, there's lots of other videos, documentaries, journalistic pieces talking about their dishonesty as a company or misrepresenting certain facts, claiming credit for things that they can take no credit for. And so let's pretend that we really want this system. There are other companies we can do business with. We could do business, Motorola's been doing the same thing for years and no one ever talks about them, because they've got a good PR person. you know but what it comes down to is I think that some of these systems, because of how pervasive they are just straight up unconstitutional. If there was a license plate reader at the entrance to a school property, I think it is absolutely the right of that school district and that school to know who is coming onto their property, right? It's a restricted area. We are not allowed on their property unless we have a reason to be on their property or if we're a student. They absolutely have a right. But when you start putting them everywhere and they're unavoidable and they are able to build travel records, I think that's when it becomes unconstitutional. And now they're have a partnership with Ring cameras. So yeah, we've got 45 of these license plate readers, but how many Ring cameras do we have in our community? Probably 30 to 40,000. Like that's where it starts to be like, is this the Minority Report? Great movie, terrifying concept, right? So that's kind of my biggest issue with it beyond the money.
Yes, thank you very much, Hunter. And I do have the post that was published today up on the screen for those who want to know why item 8.4 should not be on the consent agenda. This relates to the force metrics arrangement, and hopefully for those who do reside in Sparks and who take an interest in this issue, they would be able to read the post by Hunter and inform themselves of what the city council is proposing to do. I do think this requires debate. This requires open discussion. This shouldn't just be voted in unanimously without any sort of public comment, without any sort of specific focus on the issue. Now, I wanted to ask you, as a way to essentially encapsulate this issue, because you're not an opponent of using technology for law enforcement, but there's
No.
a good way to do it. And then there are some deeply problematic ways of doing it. Could you outline what, in your views, is a broad principle framework for thinking about it? Because we're certain to have additional technologies emerge and be offered by various private vendors. How would you make the distinction between technologies that can help and technologies that would primarily have the effect of violating people's rights or creating these unintended consequences?
So the first thing is, huge fan of Carl Sagan, and I really like his book, The Demon Haunted World. And I'm going to oversimplify it, but really using the scientific method everywhere. But the first question we should be asking is, when we're looking at doing business with a company, when we're looking at inviting them into our community, is this a good partner? Is this someone who has any care about the community, or are they just here to make a quick buck? What are their beliefs as a company? And that's why I say, Flock Safety is not a good company to do business with, because they have some cybersecurity issues that they've known about for a year and they haven't addressed. They've tried to cover it up. And just some of the emails that they've sent to, you can Google Flock Safety contracts canceled. A lot of city councils have been kind of taken aback by their communications with the CEO, and some police chiefs have been offended by his emails, and they've canceled their contracts. And then they find out that the cameras are still on, and other law enforcement agencies in other states are able to access them. And so I think that they're not necessarily a good partner. Forced metrics, here's the thing. It might be the best thing that's ever happened to Sparks. The city of Reno uses it. I think we should have a little bit more discussion on it. I'd love to see a presentation on it. And sometimes when these companies come into town and want to do business with the city, they do. They do a presentation at the city council meeting. They might do a public information session. This has not happened. I look at our AI system that's doing our non-emergency dispatch. It's called Desk Officer Inc. I would love for the city of Sparks and the Sparks Police to set up a phone number that is not our non-emergency dispatch, but like a demo line for me to be able to interact with this thing, and just I feel uncomfortable calling the non-emergency dispatch. Every time I've ever had to call it, medical or police has been dispatched. And I understand that they're saying that is not the case with all their calls. Most of those calls could have been an email. They're not emergencies. At the same time, like, we don't know how good this AI is. We look at Chat GPT pushing people to kill themselves. And I think there's some bigger discussions about mental health that are higher than the level of a city council. But at the same time, like, I think we need to be more curious, ask more questions, and be willing to communicate with other jurisdictions that have dealt with these companies, and find out, is this company a good partner? Beyond that, having good data to prove its efficacy. ShotSpotter, one of my biggest critiques of ShotSpotter was there was a time where they were kind of manipulating the data, possibly in other jurisdictions. I think they've gotten a lot better about that. I think their product has gotten better, and now we have cleaner data that proves its efficacy. When we look at Flock Safety, they have data. It is not clean data. The data absolutely says it's very effective, but it's not clean data. And when people audit it, they find out, maybe it's not that helpful. Maybe it is $300,000 a year in snake oil, as I say in my article. So I think just starting there, having more community engagement, and you can't do that around everything. The reason that this is allowed to be on the consent agenda is because it's under $100,000. They're voting on accepting a $66,000 grant to pay for this. There are I look through the other consent agenda items. A lot of it is just paying bills, paying the power bill, paying, there's a refund to a company that paid for a permit, but they're not doing the project, and none of the money was spent. That's the stuff that should be on a consent agenda. We don't necessarily need to debate that, but like, maybe we should. And it isn't even about debating it. I think it's just, being a little more open with the public. And at the same time, I think a big problem is we don't have the money to allow the public affairs officer to do more public affairs. Uh, we have our city public affairs team. There's two of them, and I've met them. I have known one for years, and I would say they're worked down to the bone. And I know the Sparks Police Public Affairs Officer is worked down to the bone. So there's all these little problems that we're seeing in other places. Maybe they want to be more transparent and want to engage with the public, but they just can't because they don't have the time or the money because they need to look for drunk drivers. So that's kind of the domino effect of all these issues that are adding up, and now we're here.
Yes, and I would say as budgetary shortfalls continue, as people become more strapped for time and resources, there will be the temptation to outsource a lot of labor to technology. Because if you have, say, an automated call center where an AI chatbot takes a person's call and at least does a first line screening, well, that could enable a human staff member to do something else, but it doesn't really work if there are no human staff members to ultimately make the decision. And I think an important principle is these tools, especially right now, they're not general intelligences, they're narrow AIs. They're built for specific purposes, and they may or may not be effective even at those, but there should always be a human in the loop to ultimately make the decision of how is this used, and to make that decision using critical thinking. So that's a principle that I would like to emphasize, but it does require people in those positions who are adequately compensated and who are respected for what they do. So I think that's going to be a continued issue for a lot of jurisdictions, not just Sparks. And Mike Lazine points out, all of this becomes a problem when governments on any level are not hiring enough people to help out their constituents or residents. Budget limitations and cutbacks are not helpful. So yes, there is a bit of an uphill battle to be fought. And this is why these discussions are essential in order to find some useful applications for these technologies without giving up what actually makes for effective service, what actually solves the problems of one's constituents. So now I will open this conversation up. Art Ramon, Daniel, do you have any follow-up questions on the use of technology and public safety, AI, predictive policing, any of these areas? Daniel?
Yeah, great to meet a fellow candidate for city council. I can't run again until 2028 because now they're doing the districts in off years or alternating election years. So, but anyway, it's a great time to do some groundwork. And I think what city councils should do, I mean, technically they are the board members of a municipal corporation. I think most cities are set up that way. And, you know, if this is the case, aren't all the residents potentially like shareholders or stockholders or cooperative members? I mean, it seems like you could have a lot more, you know, community engagement with your shareholders of the corporation who are the residents. And, you know, I think there's a big space for municipal resolutions that have been passed in other cities to become open data tokenized and to be shared and you know, say, hey, so and so city is doing this, why don't we ask our residents if this could work in our city? And the other thing I'd like to really hammer on, you know, in local government is property tax. I know Jolly Mitch of the Pirate Party and I are both big geoists. We're big believers in Henry George, you know, land value tax, you know, use property tax in a market kind of setting, so you don't get people, you know, sitting on blighted properties and keeping them blighted because it's a great investment, you know, buy the worst looking property. Anyway, there's lots of ways that property taxes are being abused, and technically, you know, we could get it to where that's the only tax that's being paid. You could eliminate all other taxes. Now I know this is a big, you know, a big bite for municipal government to do. But
If I can interject with that point, a property tax, if that's okay.
yeah, yeah.
I believe our property taxes are based on when the house was built. And then they're capped at 3% for your primary residence. And so my house, I pay like $1,100 a year for property taxes. My parents live in the same city. Their house was built about 7 years ago. It's about the same size. They're a lot smaller than me. They're still only paying about $3,000 a year. And so, in some communities, the property tax makes up 70% of the revenue. In our community, it makes up 30% of the revenue. And the rest of our revenue is sales tax and C-tax revenue. And the problem with that is no matter how you paint it, I think the economy is just not good right now. People are not buying as much. And so that's where we've seen a huge reduction in income.
A big issue in Thousand Oaks is people building so-called ADUs or auxiliary dwelling units. Is that easy to do in Sparks, or is the city giving people any kind of help with that?
I think it's a huge issue in Reno. It hasn't come up in Sparks yet. I don't think you're allowed to do it yet. I think there's some loopholes around it. It's like if you're just adding on to your house and it has a separate entrance, I think that's allowed as long as you're respecting the setbacks. But as far as building a separate structure on a lot, I do not believe that's allowed right now. And then that brings up an issue of, do we have enough parking? As crazy as that sounds, some of these streets in our neighborhood are not big enough to allow for street parking. And then it's like, well, we have street parking there. It's pretty cramped. Well, what about the fire engines? Are these places big enough to allow for proper firefighting, or are we making compromises on safety? So I think there's some issues that were laid out, when they built these neighborhoods back in the 1960s and laid them out. And we're kind of experiencing the pain of that, today, 50 years later.
And then another question I got real quick is, do you know if there's a local makerspace in Reno? I'm a big fan of makerspaces. So.
I love makerspaces. I think we have two. We have the Generator, which is big with Burning Man. That's actually, I think it's in my district. And they built the space whale there. If you're familiar, they build a lot of Burning Man art there. And they build other thing. I'm looking, it is not in it is just like one side of the street is my district and the other side of the street is the Generator. And so the Generator's kind of been, um, uh, I think, a great asset in our community. It just moved to an old Lowe's that had been blighted and empty for years. And then we have another makerspace that I believe is actually it might be in Sparks, it might be in Reno. I remember taking my dad to go look at it for him, as he's retired, and he was like looking at all these tools, and I'm like, you should go look at this makerspace. And it's fantastic. I would say for me, for what I do in my career, it's cheaper for me to buy the tools, and I do make money on some of the stuff I do. So I make camera parts, I make satellite transmitter parts. I've huge advocate for 3D printing, and I make Steadicam parts and I'm printing them. I found that aluminum is too brittle, and so I make things out of PETG. It's my favorite material to work with, and it's proven itself to me. And so if you guys watch broadcast television on the West Coast, you might actually see some of those broadcasts are aided by parts that I've made, that they help mount satellite transmitters and things like that. So we don't have a huge culture of repairability in our community. I'd like to change that, but we do have some maker spaces available. Yes.
Oh, what about bike friendliness? Is Reno bike friendly? Right.
No. I used to ride a bike. It lasted 3 weeks. I feel like I brushed death a few too many times. Northern Nevada is one of the least bike friendly places I've ever seen, which is hard for me to comprehend. My family is Dutch Indonesian. My mother was born in Amsterdam. I'm a first gen citizen. I was born in Reno, but my mom was born in Amsterdam. I have a lot of family in the Netherlands, and I remember visiting them and going through a McDonald's drive-through on a bike. And I was like, this is the coolest thing. And here, if I ride up to a McDonald's drive-through on a bike, like, they're gonna tell me to get lost. So no, it's not bike friendly. You know, and maybe that's something I can address in the third point, which is traffic. But we have one of the most dangerous stretches of road in all of Nevada passes through this district, this ward. So we have some serious problems with pedestrian safety, with bike safety, and also just with traffic safety in general.
Well, you definitely sound like a great resource to keep in touch with for municipal, progress.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being on the salon.
Yes, indeed. And I can back up Hunter in terms of the issues with parking and Sparks. So a lot of the older neighborhoods essentially have cars parked on both sides of the street. I think this is an outgrowth of the older homes having small garages, and a lot of households now have 2-3 cars per household. Some of them are these larger vehicles, SUVs, pickup trucks, and I will often see them parked on both sides of the street. So it's difficult even to find street parking. I wonder if there could be some solutions for expanding parking space adjacent to neighborhoods that could help with that.
Yeah, I think the other problem, it's one of those problems that a lot of what I've talked about is kind of universal to any community anywhere in the world, anywhere in the US, anywhere in Nevada. Something unique to Northern Nevada, Reno and Sparks, is we have like a higher rate of car ownership than other places because we have a lot of classic cars. Like we have Hot August Nights. It's a huge thing here. I can, just knowing my neighbors on my street, I want to say every other house has 3 to 4 cars. And then you have the 2-car households and the 1-car households. But like me personally, me and my wife live here in this house. We have 3 cars. We've got 2 of our daily drivers, and we have a classic car that was her car, and before we even got married. And I know my neighbor has a classic Mustang and an Oldsmobile in his garage, and that's why he parks his cars outside. And so, as much as I want to say, like, what I have heard from the opposition to this, where they're like, it's not a problem. People can just stop storing stuff in the garage and park in their garage. We just own more cars than other communities. So it's a kind of a weird problem, and there's a lot of people who buy, they have a classic Mustang that they're working on, and they'll buy 2 more classic Mustangs that are wrecked, and so they're storing those as well while they cannibalize them for parts. And as I've walked down through our neighborhood, I've walked 125 miles in Ward 2. There are 100 miles of roads, and if you walk down both sides, I've walked 125 miles in Ward 2. I visited 2,000 houses. The number of classic cars in our community is just astounding, and I like classic cars. I think it's cool that we're that is a culture of repairability and looking back at our history. And we have a lot of young people that have inherited cars or been interested in purchase old cars, and they restore them. And it is not uncommon to drive around and see a Ford Model T, or Oldsmobile on the road, or a 66 Mustang. Like it's very common. So it's kind of a weird thing in our community.
Yes, indeed. And I think this is a good bridge to the pedestrian safety issue, because you mentioned you've walked 125 miles, and actually yesterday I ran a marathon plus distance as part of a group around McCarran Parkway, which extends into Sparks, of course. And some of the issues with regard to pedestrian safety were manifested firsthand. So there is a part along McCarran Parkway that kind of heads into the residential areas of Sparks, where I would say there's a 6-way intersection. It's quite confusing, actually. And the front group of runners were about to cross one of the roads in that intersection. They had a walk light, so they had the right to proceed. And there was this driver, he looked rather disreputable, who just decided to go ahead and make a right turn in front of the group of runners.
Is that McCarran and Pyramid?
I believe that's McCarran close to, it's close to Pyramid. It's not quite Pyramid, but it is close to the overpass for I-80. So it was the road, I think it was the off-ramp from I-80 that this person was trying to turn right from. And he just completely disregarded the fact that there was a group of around 25 runners who had the right of way. But that particular area seems to me to be really congested, and it just takes one bad driver to create a really hazardous situation. So with that as an introduction, tell us what you have observed about the traffic issues and Sparks and what ideas you have for fixing them.
So that's the other, like the third piece of this puzzle. So we got firefighters, emergency response, we have technology and policing, and then we have traffic. And traffic is just absolutely horrible. I don't know if you can you put like a map of USA Parkway, Pyramid I-80 on? I don't know how hard that is, but
I'll see what I can do.
It makes it a little bit easier to talk about it. But on Interstate 80, so Interstate 80 is one of the most important highways in the country. I mean, it's a National Defense Act highway. It's used by the military a lot, regardless of your feelings, on the military. There's a lot of military traffic on it because that's what it's for at the end of the day. We have Top Gun at Fallon. It is not in San Diego like the movie says. It is at Fallon in the middle of the desert. And so we get a lot of airplanes on trucks. We get a lot of tanks on trucks that are going to go be targets for training. And I think it's an important part of our community. And then we have at USA Parkway, we have Tesla. We have Switch. These are some of the largest employers in Northern Nevada. And so what we have is from Reno and Sparks to this place called USA Parkway. It's about 15 miles, and it's 25,000 average daily trips on I-80 on one road, and it's a 4-lane road, 2 lanes on each side. And at rush hour, the speed limit in that part is 65 miles an hour, and it'll get down to 20 or 30 miles an hour with how much traffic we have. So it routinely takes 45 minutes to an hour to get out there when it should be 20 for some drivers. It is very common for there to be motor vehicle collisions that close both sides of the road. Maybe they're bringing in a helicopter to evacuate someone for medical reasons, or the collision actually spreads over the median and blocks both lanes. And so then it's like, well, how do you get home? What's the alternative route? And right now it's to go through like Dayton and Carson City, which is, I think it's a 2-hour round trip, and it's like 120 miles for that detour when it should be a 15-mile drive. And so right now, what's in the planning stages, what's already happening, this is not me, I don't want to take credit for it, but I think it's something that's incredibly important. So first off, they're widening Interstate 80 to be 3 lanes on both sides. I think that's going to help because it is a very tight road. There's some parts of it with no median, with no shoulder. And so when there is a collision, it's like, where do you go? So obviously it's closed. So they're going to widen it to 3 lanes on each side. That's already in the works. I think it's funded. It's in the design stage. I do know that we have talked about commuter rail. I know Union Pacific is sitting down at the table. And my favorite thing about that is it's super cheap because the rail is laid and we already have train stations. And, we could buy used train sets from another country or from Amtrak. So commuter rail, I hope that conversation continues and is productive. And I think it's important that we do both of those things to help relieve traffic. But the most important project, and this is looking at the next 10 to 15 years, is they're predicting 50,000 more jobs kind of on this USA Parkway area in the next 5 to 10 years. And so they're talking about the Northeast Connector. Thank you so much. So right in the middle. So at the bottom, you can see Interstate 80. And at the top, you can see it says Red Hawk Golf Resort, Golden Eagle Park. Approximately 20 to 25% of the daily trips are originating from this area. We call it Wingfield Springs. A lot of it is Sparks. Some of it's coming from north of there, Spanish Springs, which is unincorporated Washoe County. And all of that traffic is coming down 3 roads: Pyramid Way, Sparks Boulevard, Vista Boulevard. And it's about 20 to 25% of the average daily trips are coming from here. It's the highest concentration of the daily trips. They did a whole study of the whole region, and this is where it's red. So how do we reduce traffic? It's a domino effect again, right? So if we can solve this properly, can we get some of that traffic off of Pyramid, off of Sparks Boulevard, off of Vista Boulevard? Because these are roads that are coming through our neighborhoods. And so they're talking about connecting Vista Boulevard, where it says Golden Eagle Regional Park, and making a road that goes right to USA Parkway. So kind of off screen, where your head is where Tesla is, where USA Parkway is. And so having a road that would be 45 miles an hour, it's going to cut the mileage for these people in half. It's going to get them away from Vista Boulevard, Sparks Boulevard, and Pyramid Way, which means we're going to have, 5,000 less cars a day coming through our neighborhoods. It is so bad. So kind of, if you see right in the middle, it says more furniture for less. There's a tailor shop that I use there. And then just north of there, there's a little library. So it's 3.1 miles. One day, it took me 22 minutes to go 3.1 miles. That is unacceptable. Because now let's say we have an emergency and we need to put a fire engine up there. They're going to have to drive in the shoulder. They're going to have to drive in the median. And there's some places where that's just not possible. They're also widening Pyramid, but I think we need all 3 of these projects. I think we need Interstate 80 to be widened. I think we need commuter rail. And I think the Northeast connector is going to be huge, because while it relieves traffic in our neighborhoods, it's going to free up capacity on Interstate 80, which means people coming from South Reno, other parts of the community, are going to be able to also get to work faster, and also have a shorter alternate route than the 2-hour drive around Dayton and Carson City. So I think traffic is one of the biggest complaints I'm hearing. Furthermore, from Oddie to McCarran on Pyramid is one of the most dangerous stretches of road in all of Nevada. And just north of there, a few months ago, we had a motor vehicle collision that killed my neighbor. We share a fence. It's tragic. It is such a poorly designed road. There's these turn lanes that go to nowhere, and it's just, there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of future planning, and I think some people are getting ahead of themselves, and it's a failure in engineering. I have a background in risk management. I'm a Nevada safety and health practitioner. I've done all of the OSHA stuff, and in the film industry, like, a lot of what we talk about is how do we reduce risk, and a lot of it is engineering it out, and we've had some engineering failures. And that's not a critique on the engineers. I think we're putting too many cars on these roads. They're not designed for as many cars as we're asking them to handle. We're seeing asphalt failing early because we have too many cars. And there's other projects that are coming up. They want to build warehouses just north of Spanish Springs, and that one warehouse project is talking about 500 trucks a day, and that's coming up right now. Pyramid Way, Sparks Boulevard, and Vista Boulevard. So that's kind of the biggest issue, that we actually can see every day. And I saw that every day when I taught at Spanish Springs High School. I drove on Pyramid, and I was always opposite the traffic, thankfully. But it gets bad.
Yes. And I think it's absolutely horrific when people get killed in traffic incidents. Daniel writes, "So sad about your neighbor, Hunter." And Mike Lazine also says, "Sorry for your loss." These are the kinds of fatalities that are fully preventable. And indeed, in Nevada, there's what is called the Zero Fatalities campaign, which tries to highlight this, that essentially all of these accidents, they're the result of human error, they're avoidable, but bad infrastructure design contributes to the probability of those accidents happening. And furthermore, there are many choke points of vehicular traffic in northern Nevada, in particular because the settled areas are spread among various valleys, and sometimes there's just one major road going into a particular valley. So the extension from Vista Boulevard to USA Parkway would be of tremendous help in relieving the traffic burden. I have also said for a long time, we just need more roads going in parallel to similar destinations that would spread out the traffic a bit, given that our area has grown so much in the preceding decade and a half.
What I will qualify is, some of these roads, the city of Sparks doesn't have jurisdiction over. It's the state, it's the Regional Transportation Commission. And so a lot of the responses are, and I've gotten them from my opponent, I've gotten them from other city council members, is it's not in our jurisdiction. At a minimum, and this goes back to, the level of commitment that I want to have when I'm elected, is at a minimum, I can advocate for this stuff, because on the board of the RTC, our city council members might not be those people, but their colleague is, because it's 2 city council members from Sparks and Reno and 2 Washoe County commissioners. And so, yeah, out of our jurisdiction, my city council member's not on the RTC, but they can send an email or phone call or a text message, or have a meeting with the other council member that is on the RTC. We're not asking for any controversial advocacy. We're asking for a little bit of advocacy, a little bit of attention on a road. We're not asking for a controversial clinic that people may or may not agree with on every corner. We're not asking for marijuana dispensaries to have wider prevalence in our community or less of a role in our community. We're asking for a little bit of advocacy, on things that affect everyone. One of my favorite council members, he's not a council member anymore, Christopher Dare. He was a prominent Republican, and I was always impressed by the fact that never really factored into his advocacy and him representing the community. And in his words, the pothole does not ask how you voted. It doesn't ask who you voted for. It doesn't ask if you're a citizen or not. It doesn't ask about your ideological beliefs. That pothole is going to take out your axle and your tire. And I know that there's, my Donald Abbott sent me a picture one day, and the pothole didn't ask who he voted for, and I know who he voted for. He voted for himself, presumably, and the pothole in his ward took out his tire. And that's the kind of stuff that the city council, that's the role that the city council plays in our daily lives. The presidential administration, Congress, they're going to be doing whatever they do, but what affects our daily lives, what affects our fire department, our police, our roads, is these 5 people who sit on the city council. In Sparks, the mayor doesn't vote, so they break ties, but it's really the 5 council members that kind of rule over everything that affects our daily lives, and they absolutely are able to have some influence with some of these other boards, and they are absolutely able to advocate, and for the most part we haven't been seeing that.
Yes, and I appreciate your efforts to conduct broader outreach on behalf of the residents whom you would be representing, and making connections with other agencies who may have jurisdiction over these matters, like the construction of a road extension. And I appreciate the transpartisan spirit of your comments just now, the fact that the pothole doesn't care what party or what person somebody voted for. And I think this is in part also why the US Pirate Party endorsed your candidacy and why you accepted their endorsement, because there is this spirit of broader public concern that I've observed among the Pirate Party representatives with whom I've spoken. So I suppose, since we are approaching the conclusion of our salon, I wanted to hear a bit more of the story about the Pirate Party endorsement and also whether you would be willing to accept our US Transhumanist Party endorsement.
So I've been a pirate for years, most of my adult life, and I'll be honest, in local elections, it's sometimes bad because I can't vote in partisan primaries. We do have some open primaries, but the partisan primaries we get left out of. And so my primary ballot last year had like 2 things to vote for, and I know other people who are Republicans or Democrats, and they had 20 or 30 things that they could vote for. It felt like. But it is the party that I have most identify with. It is the party that I, most believe in. I think a lot of the issues that the Pirate Party addresses are federal issues, but at its core, the first plank of the Pirate Party is people before corporations. This is a representative democracy, and we have not been being represented at every level in every party. It's a problem. I think there are good politicians that are Republicans. I think there are good politicians that are Democrats. I think there are good independent politicians. But also, we have a lot of really bad politicians at every level. Regardless of your opinion on any one individual. My wife and I vote. A lot of these elected officials make their phone number easily available or an email, and I've called people up. I've had an audience with one of our senators. I've had an audience with our lieutenant governor. I've had an audience with my state representative here in my neighborhood. He's my neighbor. It's so amazing the access that you can have if you just try. Some people won't be willing to talk to you, but and that's my invitation to everyone. I have an email, hunter@sparkstogether.com. You can email me. I'm willing to chat on the phone. It's I have a contact form on my website, and it goes directly to me. It's not being filtered by my campaign manager or volunteers. It goes directly to me. If you want to say something mean, you can put it there and I'll get it. If you want to say something nice, I'll get it. But it really, that's what this is about, is making it easier for people to talk to their representatives and being more accessible. And that's what we don't have a lot of. And so I want to change things. I want that's what the Pirate Party's about. Someone I was invited to speak at a meeting of a party, and it's a nonpartisan role, and all the other candidates are like trying to be nonpartisan, and someone kind of outed me, and they're like, yeah, what does this other mean on your registration? And I'm like, well, it means I'm a pirate, but I'm not going to go change my registration just for free votes, or to make it like, it's insincere for me to change my registration right before an election. It just seems not sincere and not authentic and not ethical. So I'm just going to be me. I'm going to be a pirate. I'm going to talk to Republicans, Democrats, libertarians, transhumanists. It doesn't matter, because it's about representing people. One of my favorite interactions I've ever had, it was this guy who was just absolutely upset that I was at his house. And I'll be honest, I'm just, with the unconscious bias, I was kind of scared of this guy. He's got face tattoos. Um, he's huge. He's buff. He's a bodybuilder. And he comes up to me and he says, "What do you think about felons?" And I was caught off guard. And I'm like, I think I still have to represent you because you live in this neighborhood. And he says, "Well, so I've got this pothole," and he points to the biggest pothole I've ever seen in front of his house. And I'm like, "So if you get elected and I call you, you're going to do something about it?" And I told him, I don't know if I can guarantee that I'm going to get it paved, but I can definitely forward that email to someone and definitely talk to you and represent you. There's 22,000 people in this district, and it is our representatives' job to represent them all, regardless of their ideologies, regardless of their beliefs, regardless of who they voted for. And I think we've lost that. I think we have people that are representing organizations that give them $5,000 for their campaign. I think we have individuals that represent their personal beliefs. I'll be honest, I'm a teetotaler. I don't believe in alcohol. I don't really like gambling. At the same time, I recognize that some of our casinos in our community are a huge asset to us, and they're important. And I believe that, yes, I have my personal beliefs, but I should not be imparting them upon everyone. And I think that we have people in office that are doing that and not representing everyone. I know that it's hard to do. it is so hard to do, especially when it goes against your spiritual beliefs that you may or may not have, right? But at the same time, like, you have to do it. We have a problem in Carson City, where the public administrator won't sign off on cremation because they're religious and they don't believe in cremation. And I think at one point there were almost 70 bodies being just stored that weren't being cremated, and all they needed to do was sign. And I get it. I get their spiritual beliefs, but at the same time, like, just the dignity for those people who have passed. It is so disgusting that person's personal beliefs came first, and the domino effect. All these funeral homes don't have the capacity to take on any more bodies. And I believe it's been solved. I believe those people have been cremated, but at the same time, for an elected official to not sign the paperwork, like, it's just so disheartening that they're putting their personal beliefs first. So my personal belief is that we need to put people first. And I'm not going to agree with everyone, and no one's going to agree with everything I say. But what I will say is, on the dais, I will be absolutely thinking about my neighbors, whether they voted for me or not.
Yes, thank you very much for those remarks, Hunter. So, can we say that you would accept an endorsement from the U.S. Transhumanist Party?
Yes, absolutely. I think, I shared privately with you some of the hesitancies, and it's like a catch-22. My belief is I shouldn't not do something because I'm afraid of how it looks. I just want to be authentically me, and I think it's more honest. I'd rather come up here and say I'm a flawed human being. One of my legs doesn't work the way it should, and I've got some personal beliefs that some people might not agree with, but I'm still going to do my best to represent everyone in this neighborhood and our visitors and our guests, and just be better. That's what it's about. It's about doing a little bit better every day. And there's not a $20 million line item we can cut, but you know, getting elected and being able to say, maybe we can cut 1/4% here or 0.5% here. It all adds up, and eventually we'll be able to make that up, and while putting people first. And there's some unpopular decisions that'll have to be made, and they are going to be the real decisions that are hard. And I'm not just going to say that they're hard. They're going to be unpopular, they're going to be hard, but sometimes we have to do that to make sure we have enough firefighters and have enough police officers, so when you call 911, someone actually shows up, because that has happened where 911 has been called and they can't show up. So that's what this is about.
Yes, and I really appreciate your integrity. I appreciate your commitment to serving the people of Sparks Ward 2, but also of Sparks, Nevada more generally, and serving these people regardless of their personal beliefs, regardless of where you agree or disagree. I think you're a candidate who is going to strive to do a good job for all of your constituents, and that is what we need in politics. We need public servants, and I think your comments display that spirit of public service. Daniel points out that what you're articulating is a culture of continuous improvement.
Complacency kills. Complacency
Yes.
kills.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it does. And I think you are an example of a non-complacent candidate, given how many miles you've walked, how much door-to-door outreach you've done. You remind me of Jennifer Hughes, again, who ran for Camden, New Jersey mayor. She did a lot of door-to-door campaigning, and during our last Virtual Enlightenment Salon, she pointed out this is a really effective tactic, and a lot of people get to engage with you who feel like they don't have a voice, who feel like nobody else in elected office has listened to them, and yet you are there speaking with them and finding common ground. So we really appreciate that. Jennifer says she walked so much she walked the heels right off her shoes. So those are the kinds of candidates we like to endorse. Thank you very much, Hunter, for being there and for accepting our endorsement as well.
SparksTogether.com. If you're a citizen, you're here, legally in the US. If you're not here legally or you're out of the country, please don't do this. But $5, $10, $20, whatever you can give helps immensely. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Sparkstogether.com. That is the website for Hunter Rand. And again, you don't have to live in Sparks to donate. Just be a US citizen and help out his campaign. I think it will go to very good use. And Hunter, you've shared some excellent ideas with us today. I wish we had a bit more time because there are some other fascinating areas of emerging technologies that we could discuss. Perhaps we could have you on as a guest in the future as your campaign progresses. In the meantime,
Absolutely.
let us all live long and prosper.